Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, more now on those three Labour amendments to the Queen's speech, which MPs will be debating later on. Let's bring you a look at them. First, there's Jeremy Corbyn's main amendment, dubbed the Alternative Queen's Speech. It calls for an end to austerity, the scrapping of university tuition fees and a Brexit deal that delivers, quote, exactly the same benefits as remaining in the single market. But the Labour leader is facing divisions within his own party, as we know, over that question. There's a rival amendment from Chuka Umunna calling for the UK to remain in the single market and the customs union post-Brexit. While Labour's Stella Creasy has used an amendment to put pressure on the Tories' deal with the DUP, proposing that the government should allow Northern Irish women to have abortions in England free of charge, something the Democratic Unionists would presume would oppose. Let's discuss what's happening in Parliament at the moment with Ian Dunt, author of the book Brexit, What the Hell Happens Now, and Joanne Nadler, Conservative commentator and political writer. Very good afternoon to both of you. Ian, since you're wearing a tie, let's start with the really pressing issue of the day, which is that the Speaker Bercow has just announced, in response to a question from Peter Bone, Tory MP, and something of a character, who picked upon the fact that something we noticed, in fact, I'm tempted to even say that I noticed yesterday and brought to the country's attention, that an MP on the opposition benches stood up to put a question during PMQs, tieless. What do you think?
Yeah, so apparently Bercow has now said that men don't need to wear MPs in the Commons, and as I understand it, that goes for the press gallery as well.
Oh.
I am rather pleased about this, I have to say, because on those stifling days when you sat there all sort of buttoned up, looking rather jealously at your female colleagues who are, able to wear blouses and shirts and all of that. So this seems like a long overdue change. And of course, the Commons is a place that's rather typified by changes which are long overdue and not made. So full credit to John Bercow for it.
Joanne, do we see this as part of the reforming zeal of Speaker Bercow, another relaxed rule?
Well, for a moment I thought you were discriminating against me for not having worn a tie, and I thought having worn a jacket I was rather smart. But maybe that goes to the heart of this. Maybe he's trying to introduce an egalitarian measure, because clearly women don't tend to wear ties, so he wants to introduce something that applies to both genders across the House.
Well, Ian, at the risk of making a painful segue, both genders are affected by what's happening in Parliament today, in the sense that you've got, for instance, James Brokenshire rushing back from Northern Ireland to vote, Prime Minister Berlin rushing back to vote. We saw yesterday the vote on the public sector pay amendment. The government got through by 14 votes. This is the new world, isn't it, where, 14's a thumping majority.
Yeah, exactly. This is all about slim votes. You're going to see this for the duration of this government, which, let's face it, on the sort of the way that things look now, is probably not going to be a particularly long time at all. I mean, this is only the Queen's speech, where, of course, Theresa May can bank on a considerable degree of Tory support. Those MPs who would otherwise be wary of Brexit or some other issue will sort of think, well, look, I need to be loyal at least for the Queen's speech, because, of course, if that falls down, then, the whole government needs to sort of reform. We'll probably have an election. There's a very good chance that Jeremy Corbyn would win that election. So here she can actually count on some loyalty from Tory MPs, and yet even now, at this early stage, she is really struggling to get these votes through. I mean, that was a tight vote last night, really a very slim margin. I think we can expect some pretty slim margins again. But of course, that should not distract us from the fact that two of those Labour amendments, the Chuka Umunna one versus the Jeremy Corbyn one on Brexit, are actually about an internal Labour war rather than an attack on the Conservatives.
Joanne, you're nodding vigorously. Go on.
I am. I think it's fascinating, actually, that Labour have got this opportunity to undermine the government at a critical point in its programme so recently after the election. And yet, actually, they're scoring a bit of an own goal here, because these amendments that they've proposed really point to big philosophical differences within the Labour Party. So actually, what we're seeing in this debate today is both parties with logistical problems, if you like, but actually Labour, I think, backfiring here on their tactics.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, isn't it, how many people, I was going to say defy the party whip on the Labour side, but that's probably not the right phrase to use, but how many people, let's say, back the Chuka Umunna amendment, at least?
Yeah, this is crucial. So, I mean, there was a letter that was put out last week by several Labour figures, MEPs, peers and MPs, saying, look, we have got to stay in the single market and the customs union. The price of leaving those things is hundreds of thousands of working class jobs, of jobs in agriculture, of the kind of people that Labour is supposedly set up to represent. Now, that did not go down very well in Labour High Command. Keir Starmer, the Brexit Secretary, who used to be putting forward a sort of pro-single market position, but has gradually been sort of enveloped by the Corbyn camp after the election, now that Corbyn did better than expected, suddenly was going out to people and accusing them of a failure of sort of trust and of loyalty in the leadership. We are really seeing a proper fight as to what Brexit entails, as to who the party represents going on inside of Labour, in exactly the same way that we're seeing going on inside of the Conservative Party. If politics made any sense at all, you would right now see an anti-Brexit coalition that was made up of Tories and Labour, and a pro-Brexit coalition made up of right-wing Tories and left-wing Labour MPs. But of course it doesn't. It's split into sort of fairly arbitrary tribes. So we're seeing these divisions within parties rather than just across them.
Joanne, can we just risk a digression since the subject of Keir Starmer has been brought up, and perhaps a modification in his behaviour? It's interesting, isn't it? He's now been sworn into the Privy Council. Am I right in saying that? Which means that he gets to see secret stuff. And that may inform his behaviour, some of the decisions he takes.
Well, in a sense, I would hope that it does, because these are, as you say, these are different levels, if you like, of access to information that parliamentarians achieve depending on their seniority. And some of that information is very critical to national security, to various issues, decisions that are being made. And therefore, if he is, if you like, better informed, then one hopes that that would inform his decision-making to a certain extent.
OK. Joe, let's just think about the other amendment, the Stella Creasy amendment. I mean, you know, you can see the approach here politically,
yes,
which is to flag up the,
yes,
the umbilical attachment now between the DUP,
yes,
which has a set of values which some people, certainly the Labour benches, find inimical, and the government of the day. And there's a tension being brought to that.
I think that's right. I think, going back to my earlier point, I think Stella Creasy has been much more skillful here in terms of the capacity to score a hit against the government in raising this issue, because we've already seen that there is actually considerable cross-party support for her proposal about women being allowed to have access to free abortions travelling from Northern Ireland to England. And there is, as I say, some considerable cross-party support for this, which does, which will create a tension in terms of the vote in the House because of the very, very slim majority that Mrs May is able to command.
Ian, here we are, you know, parsing the meanings of amendments and looking at wafer-thin majorities, all the rest of it. Apart from anything else, it's a reminder that, you know, and this is something that you could argue will be magnified by Brexit, but because of the general election result, Parliament matters again, doesn't it? It matters to journalists, certainly, but it matters. Its relevance at the heart of the public, national public life is newly enshrined.
It's weird. We're almost in this period of sort of Shakespearean poetry. You know, you have Theresa May brought down by her own hubris and arrogance. And now we have, you know, the Brexit debate conducted all this time over parliamentary control, parliamentary sovereignty. An irony of ironies, then when you get a hung parliament, when you get the kind of situation that we're in, you really do see parliamentary sovereignty on a day-to-day basis. Because you need, at all moments, every MP you have to back you every single time. So MPs that feel that they're to the left of the leadership or to the right of the leadership, or more authoritarian or more liberal than the leadership, they all have vastly enhanced power. The exact opposite of what Theresa May was looking for when she sought that expanded majority. This is where things start to get very, very interesting. Not just in terms of the political soap opera, although for as long as this government endures, again, probably not very long, we are going to see some really quite tremendous political soap opera going on the floor of the Commons. But also in terms of people having the bravery and feeling that there is a purpose to them expressing their ideological convictions within a party. So in terms of substance and in terms of theatre, we're in for a very interesting time indeed.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, Joanne, the Queen's speech represents a sort of phony war period, doesn't it? But even yesterday, as Ian suggests, you know, there was someone like Philip Davis, seen as on the right of the party, standing up and questioning, I think it was the foreign aid budget. Now, OK, maybe he would have done that 6 months ago. Maybe he feels, as some backbenchers probably do, newly emboldened, because we're going to enter that phase. It's shades of John Major's government where, as a backbencher, you can raise your profile, you can make mischief, you can make a difference.
Well, I think Parliament has actually been really for the last few years on a bit of an upward curve, which is a very positive thing. We've seen a great deal of respect played to the role that the MPs have on select committees, for example. And so I think this is part of an ongoing trend, which is a positive one. And I mean, Ian's spoken eloquently about the pressures on the government. But I'd also say, I mean, there are certain ironies here for Jeremy Corbyn and his immediate cohort, some of whom have, been very outspoken in the past about the importance of direct action, which really undermines the role of Parliament, really undermines the importance of democratic parliamentary accountability in this country, very dangerously, I'd suggest. And so I think it's going to be very significant to see how Jeremy Corbyn is held to account within Parliament as well, and some of his more outlandish views hopefully exposed by members of Parliament.
Joanne Nadler, in jacket, Ian Dunt, in tie. Thanks both very much indeed. Thanks a lot.
Government has made a concession over abortion as pressure builds ahead of a Commons vote on the Queen's speech. It's agreed to fund abortions for Northern Irish women who travel to England to have the procedure, following an amendment by the Labour MP Stella Creasy. Theresa May's slim majority, even with the support of the DUP, means every vote will be required to see the bill through. And the Prime Minister has flown back from meeting European leaders in Berlin in order to vote. In a letter to MPs explaining the abortion U-turn, the Minister for Women and Equalities, Justine Greening, this is what she had to say. At present, women from Northern Ireland are asked for payment to have abortions in England, and from now on, it's our proposal that this will no longer happen. This is clearly a sensitive issue and one which has direct implications for equality in treatment of women from Northern Ireland. We'll speak to our senior political correspondent, Robert Nisbet, who is in Westminster. So this is heading off the amendment, is it, from Stella Creasy? Robert, good afternoon.
That's absolutely right, Kay. That's what it is. And just, I suppose, to backtrack a little, what we're talking about is the Queen's speech, which is the legislative agenda that the government puts forward to be voted on by Parliament, and it basically sets out the laws that they want to put in place. Now, after a general election, usually there's a comfortable majority, and the manifesto on which the winning party, fought its campaign sails through Parliament. Not anymore, because we have a minority government. Of course, they've managed to cobble together a slim majority with this deal with the DUP, but it is the DUP that has stopped abortions and same-sex marriage, which are devolved matters in Northern Ireland, from taking place. So the practice has been that women from Northern Ireland who want an abortion have to travel to England and pay £1,400 for it. Now, Stella Creasy, the Labour MP for Walthamstow in London, put forward an amendment to the Queen's speech saying that no woman from Northern Ireland should have to pay, and that cost should be covered by government. Now, what happened was that there were a number of people on the Conservative backbenches who started to support it. Therefore, it put the government at risk of a defeat on its Queen's speech. Now, that probably wouldn't have been enough to topple the government, but would have been extremely embarrassing. So the government has decided to back down. It said that it will find the money to help those women cover the costs of the abortion, and Stella Creasy had this exchange with the Chancellor Philip Hammond.
The figure of £1,400 is what Northern Irish women were having to spend to get an abortion here in England, and therefore it is welcome that the government is now saying they will correct this injustice. However, he will know, as everybody knows, the devil will be in the detail. So can I ask him whether he will make a commitment on behalf of this government to meet with myself and representatives of organisations like Mary Stopes and BPAS and the London Irish Abortion Campaign to look at how we can turn this into a reality so that those women in Northern Ireland today who have finally had their voices heard can use their services as soon as possible.
Well, look, I'd say to the Honourable Lady, please read the letter that my Honourable friend has sent out. We will be funding her department with additional funding so that she can make a grant to the external organisations who will provide these services. I think she will be satisfied when she's read the letter and understood the details. If she's not, I'm happy to meet with her.
And this is the letter that has been sent to all of the MPs. There isn't the phrase embarrassing climb down in the letter, unsurprisingly, but that is in effect what it is. And it also shows, Kay, just how important now backbenchers are. They can basically rule the roost. And if one of them or a group of them have an issue with any specific government policy, that could be enough to threaten the government's extremely slim majority. For example, Heidi Allen, who used to be member of the Conservative Compassionate Caucus, it looks as though she could potentially cause troubles on a number of fronts for the government, and specifically about this deal with the DUP that the Conservatives had to put in place in order to achieve their majority is something that she finds more than a little distasteful.
Mr. Speaker, I can barely put into words my anger at the deal my party has done with the DUP. We didn't need to do it. I cannot fault the DUP for wanting to achieve the very best for their residents in Northern Ireland, nor for their tough negotiating skills. But I must put on record my distaste for the use of public funds to garner political control. We should have run with a minority government and showed the country what mature, progressive politics looks like. The only comfort I can take is knowing that people in Northern Ireland will benefit.
And just a reminder, she is a Conservative MP there, tearing strips off her own government. But it isn't just the Conservatives. The Labour Party, too, have got problems in this new febrile atmosphere, with some of the more moderate MPs tabling another motion, an amendment to the Queen's speech, even though their leader had already put forward an alternative Queen's speech, and this specifically about Brexit. They say what they're trying to do is to try to push the Labour leader more over to their way of thinking, which is to stay in the single market and the customs union, but Jeremy Corbyn is holding firm. So really it's a brave new world of politics, and backbenchers really do hold the power now, not the party leaderships.
Just to clarify, because obviously we're going to be looking at this in a lot of detail, aren't we, in the next hour when the amendments are read, etc., etc. Stella Creasy, will she still table her amendment or not?
That's what we're waiting to find out. We're trying to get clarification from the Speaker as to whether that will happen. We believe that it will, because she wants to see the substance of that letter and probably wouldn't pull her amendment until she had had some thoughts about that. So potentially there will be a vote on that, Kate.
Handily, Robert, thank you. We've got Stella Creasy with us. She's just joining us now live. Hi, Stella. Thanks for joining us.
The opportunity of this Parliament to work together.
Hi, Kate. Hi. So, just clarify to start with, does this mean that your amendment won't happen now? You've pulled it.
It does make this Parliament a little bit more interesting than the Parliament I left.
I'm just waiting to get a bit more detail about how the scheme will work. You'll forgive me, Kay, but obviously I was involved in the work around the Dubs Amendment to help child refugees, where we saw the government make commitments and then actually several months later they were reneged upon. So I just want to make sure we've got all our ducks in order. I certainly have to say, though, having seen the initial letter from the Secretary of State, it's very encouraging, because there is a recognition that there has been an injustice for too long, and our Northern Irish ladies have been left out of a key service. Although they are UK taxpayers, they don't have the same access to abortion services, and that needs to be rectified.
This amendment's so important to you. If you can develop on that point for us, please, Stella.
We see a majority of MPs voting for that amendment today. I very much doubt.
Yeah, it's just very simple. At the moment, Northern Irish women, if they come to England and Wales, cannot access abortion services on the NHS. They have to pay privately. There's about 1,000 women a year who are registered coming to private providers, having to pay upwards of £1,400 for a service. As UK taxpayers, because they're part of the United Kingdom, they're contributing towards the NHS, but because they cannot access that service in Northern Ireland, they also find the doors are closed to them at my local hospital in Walthamstow. That's what we wanted to change. I don't see why a decision made in Belfast should impact on what is available in London. The government says it's listened today, and I think we are seeing signs that they have listened. I just want to make sure the detail's right.
We did hear from the Health Secretary quite recently, Jeremy Hunt, when there was this case in the Supreme Court, and he'd sought to block an appeal by a mum and daughter from Northern Ireland out of respect for Northern Irish law. So I can see why you are perhaps a little bit anxious about what might happen in the future. But I suppose the alternative argument to that is that it's going to cost something like £250,000 for this to go ahead, given that something like 2 women a day come from Northern Ireland to England to have this procedure. What would you say to those who say that money could be better spent elsewhere?
Others of us, like me, split right down the middle, and others heavily remain. So
Well, I'm glad you raised that, Kay, because actually, if the government were going to continue to resist this policy, obviously it was going to continue on in the courts, it's likely they would have spent more money fighting the case than it would have actually cost to provide this service. BPAS identified that it actually would be about £350,000 a year to provide this service, which in the grand schemes of the NHS, and I must stress again, Northern Irish women are UK taxpayers, so they are contributing to the cost of these services, is not very much. So actually I think it's a win-win value for money also for human rights today.
You haven't got long before you decide whether or not to pull your amendment, about 45 minutes, thereabouts. What are you going to do?
Well, obviously, as I say, I'm just trying to get a bit more detail on how the scheme will work. I know the charities who are involved in the scheme are as well, because we're keen to work where we can across the House. Look, there were MPs on all sides who recognised that this was an injustice, that it was unequal, and it was right that we tackled it. There was also the DUP who were very clear that this was nothing to do with them because they considered it a matter for NHS England. So I think there is goodwill on all sides to get this right, but getting it right also means to make sure that when we make a promise in this place, we can actually deliver on it. As I say, we found out to our cost with the child refugees that isn't always the case sometimes.
You haven't decided yet whether you're going to pull it?
Well, I'm waiting to get a bit more detail. As you say, the vote won't be until 5 o'clock this evening, so there's still a bit of time left, and I do appreciate that it's a scheme that's been put in place in response to some of the concerns that have been raised, so there may be a lot of things they don't quite know yet, but I'm very open to working with people across the House, and I want to pay tribute to all the MPs who raised this concern and recognise that we need to speak up for our Northern Irish sisters.
Mr. Creasy, good to talk to you as always. Thanks very much indeed. We'll let you go. Lots to do. Thank you.
Women from Northern Ireland will no longer have to pay for abortions on the NHS in England. The decision, which was revealed hours before the Queen's speech was passed in a crucial vote, is being seen as a sign of the government's vulnerability without a House of Commons majority. There had been fears that a number of Tory MPs would vote with Labour on the issue. As our political editor Laura Koonsberg reports, today's vote is the first significant parliamentary test for Theresa May since the election.
What she wants you to see. The Prime Minister on the red carpets of Europe.
And everybody saw that he had a good mood.
Everyone in a good mood, her German colleague says. But at home, hard work. To avoid being humbled by the Commons with MPs threatening defeat.
Chancellor of the Exchequer, Philip Hammond.
Mr Deputy Speaker.
Ministers had to make a last-minute promise that women from Northern Ireland who go to England for abortions won't have to pay. The government
intends to intervene to fund abortions in England for women arriving here from Northern Ireland.
It is welcome that the government is now saying they will correct this injustice. However, he will know, as everybody knows, the devil will be in the detail.
And ministers had to do that £1 billion deal with the Northern Irish DUP to get their numbers to fury, even on their own side.
I can barely put into words my anger at the deal my party has done with the DUP. We didn't need to do it.
But
what is grubby about money being put into the infrastructure in Northern Ireland to promote jobs, money going into the health service in Northern Ireland, money going into the education service? What's grubby about that?
The Prime Minister returned this afternoon to help pass the vote to approve her government's programme, stripped of its most controversial measures. In the back.
Are you hanging on, Prime Minister?
And then out the front to face the opposition's main complaint.
It cannot ensure that when people go to work they earn enough to live on. It can't maintain our basic public services. That's a government that doesn't deserve to remain in office.
I do not see, Mr Speaker, how the nations of the UK can cope with the drastic economic hit that will come as a result of Brexit.
Is there a determination to stand up to the most powerful, as she promised in Downing Street? And the answer, to coin a phrase, is no, no, no.
The Chancellor, though, seemed to enjoy the case for the defence.
Taking the hard decisions that will set Britain on course to seize the prizes and achieve a brighter global future.
The ayes to the right, 323. The noes to the left, 309.
Yet with no overall majority and less authority, even as ministers win tonight.
So the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
They know with every vote, Parliament can show its power. So Theresa May got her win tonight, but my goodness, we saw how ministers are going to have to back down, they're going to have to compromise in order to survive. Remember, George, if the Queen's speech had fallen, this fragile government would have been at risk of collapsing. But they know they're through tonight, but that doesn't mean they're safe at all in the coming months.
Thank you, Laura. And we can get more reaction now to that decision that women from Northern Ireland will not have to pay to get abortions in England on the NHS. Let's speak to our Northern Ireland health correspondent, Mary-Louise Connolly, who's in Belfast. This isn't going to go down very well in parts of Northern Ireland. It'll be quite controversial, won't it?
That's right, George. This decision is as significant as it is controversial. Abortion laws here in Northern Ireland are extremely restrictive. In fact, a woman can only have an abortion if her life is seen to be at risk or is said to be in permanent or serious risk of her physical or mental health. So today's decision means that for the 750 women who travel from Northern Ireland to England each year, the procedure will be paid for, a sum that we're told can range anywhere between £400 and £2,000. And while many people have welcomed that move, many others have criticised it, in fact condemning it, saying that today is a black day for some unborn children. And of course, all of this happened within hours of Belfast's Court of Appeal ruling that it should be Northern Ireland's executive who should be deciding on any future legislation, an executive that's really hanging by a thread. And considering what's happening not too far away from me here at Stormont, none of this should come as any surprise in the latest twists and turns of political life here in Northern Ireland.
Mary-Louise, thank you very much. The latest deadline for a deal to be reached for power sharing to be restored to Northern Ireland has passed without any agreement. Downing Street says talks between Sinn Féin and the Democratic Unionists will continue until Monday. If there's no agreement by then, there could be a return to direct rule from Westminster. Our Ireland correspondent Chris Buckler reports now on why it's proving so difficult to reach an agreement.
Stormont is a symbol and the home of government in Northern Ireland. But since January, there's been no one home. Hours, weeks and months have passed without ministers or an assembly. Today was deadline day. 4 o'clock billed as the final chance for a return to power sharing. But the hour passed without fanfare. And most importantly, without a deal.
I believe that a resolution can be found, and I'm urging the parties to continuing focusing all of their efforts on achieving this.
For days, the parties have been locked in negotiations inside Stormont Castle. But it's clear that the Democratic Unionists haven't forgiven Sinn Féin for walking out of their coalition government earlier this year.
And if anybody thinks that they're going to collapse Stormont, get all of their demands and go back in there, then they may think again, because that's not the way we do business.
Power sharing at Stormont collapsed amid a financial row about a botched green energy scheme set up while Arlene Foster was Enterprise Minister. Sinn Féin initially said they wouldn't go back into government unless Mrs Foster stepped aside as First Minister while a public inquiry takes place into the scandal. And they've been calling for the introduction of same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland, which in the past the DUP has blocked. But a key sticking point is Sinn Féin's demand for legislation which would give official status to the Irish language.
Sinn Féin's part, we want these institutions back up and running again, but it has to be on the basis of equality and respect at their core, and institutions which command public confidence.
The DUP secured £1 billion for Northern Ireland as part of their deal to support the Tories at Westminster. But with the future of devolved governments now hanging in the balance, no one's sure if there will be Stormont minister to spend that cash, to the clear frustration of people at this funfair in Belfast.
They need now to put all the differences aside and move forward for the country as a whole and spend that money wisely on NHS, public services and on education.
I think it's a bit of a joke. I think they need to start putting things aside and looking at the bigger picture.
Even though the deadline has passed, the talks haven't come to a crashing halt. But after the weekend, the Westminster government is going to have to make decisions about what to do in Northern Ireland. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Belfast.
Theresa May has overcome a crucial parliamentary test this evening, winning the vote on the Queen's speech with the support of Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party. But she was forced to capitulate over an amendment granting Northern Ireland women free abortions in England. And in the last half hour, Labour has sacked 3 shadow ministers after they voted for an amendment calling for Britain to stay in the single market. Our political correspondent Michael Crick reports.
Theresa May's quick trip to Berlin today must have been a welcome, though brief, break from the problems of a small, precarious majority. Angela Merkel might have had good advice on that. In her 12 years as German Chancellor, her party's never had the votes to govern on its own. Back in Westminster, more trouble loomed for the government mid-morning when Speaker Bercow picked for debate this amendment to the Queen's speech.
I have selected Amendment D.
Stella Creasy's amendment demanded the end to NHS charges for women from Northern Ireland who go to England for abortions.
The question of the women in Northern Ireland and whether only the poor should be denied lawful abortions. Is there something the government can say on that, please?
Within 3 hours, Tory backbench backing for the amendment helped force the Chancellor to announce this climb down.
That my right honourable friend, the Minister for Women and Equalities, either has made or is just about to make an announcement by way of a letter to members of this House explaining that she intends to intervene to fund abortions in England for women arriving here from Northern Ireland. I hope the House will find that a sensible way of dealing with this challenge.
Justine Greening stresses in this letter to MPs that the fundamental position hasn't changed, that abortion in Northern Ireland is still a devolved issue to be decided by the executive there and the Northern Ireland Assembly. And the cost of this move may not be that great. Last year, 724 women from Northern Ireland paid the NHS around £350,000 in all for abortions in England, though today's decision may encourage more to make the trip. Just before tonight's vote, a happy Stella Creasy withdrew her amendment.
Let us send a message for women everywhere that in this Parliament their voices will be heard and their rights upheld.
Yeah! What do you think this tells us about where power lies right now?
Well, that's very interesting because we're right at the start of a new Parliament, and the fact that the government have climbed down on this issue so quickly, I think that shows that members of Parliament, cross-party, can bring to bear influence on the government and get things changed.
And today's backbench threat of a rebellion over abortion reflects the disquiet many Tories feel about their pact with the Democratic Unionists, as seen in this powerful speech today.
I can barely put into words my anger at the deal my party has done with the DUP. We didn't need to do it. I cannot fault the DUP for wanting to achieve the very best for their residents in Northern Ireland, nor for their tough negotiating skills. But I must put on record my distaste for the use of public funds to garner political control.
Theresa May came back from Germany and won the overall vote on the Queen's speech tonight.
The ayes to the right, 323.
But she clearly faces big troubles ahead. But so it seems, could Labour too. Yes, Labour's post-election unity seems to have lasted all of 3 weeks as 49 MPs defied the whips tonight to vote for an amendment supporting Britain's continued membership of the single market. As a result, 3 junior front benchers, Andy Slaughter, Ruth Cadbury and Catherine West, all from London, have been sacked by Jeremy Corbyn, and a 4th, Daniel Zeichner, has resigned. I suppose the theme of the day, you could say, is the way in which backbenchers, Tory or Labour, are loosening the ties that the whips have over them on the day that Speaker Bercow has deemed that in future male MPs no longer need to wear this kind of tie to participate in business in the chamber.
Well, do you enjoy living life on the edge? Maybe you want to think about joining the government, because as expected it managed to get its Queen's speech through the Commons today, but the margin was inevitably fine.
The ayes to the right, 323. The noes to the left, 309. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlocked. We come.
14 vote majority, a measure of how easily business can be disrupted. And for confirmation, there was the fact that to get the Queen's speech through unscathed, the government had to accept a proposal from Stella Creasy offering taxpayer-funded abortions in England for women from Northern Ireland. Backbench MPs suddenly have leverage, and the government suddenly has money to meet their requests. But today was also awkward for Labour, with several shadow ministers being sacked and one resigning. We're all struggling to get used to this new normal. Nick Watt, our political editor, watched the day at Westminster. Let's talk about Labour first, because we thought it was all rosy in the House of Labour at the moment.
That's right. I mean, this was the day when the focus was going to be solely on Theresa May, and then, as you say, Jeremy Corbyn ended up sacking 3 of his front benchers. Now, the reason why he did that was that they had defied the Labour leadership to support an amendment tabled by the former Shadow Business Secretary, Chuka Umunna, that would have committed the UK to remaining in the single market and indeed in the customs union. Now, this was roundly defeated by 101 votes to 322 after Labour whips instructed their MPs to abstain. Now, I've picked up quite a lot of anger amongst pro-European Labour MPs. They say this was a vanity vote by Chuka Umunna that handed a gift to Brexiteers who say, look at the heavy defeat. And these pro-European Labour MPs also say, why did Chuka Umunna have to table this amendment when the official Labour one called on the government to negotiate the exact same benefits on the customs union and single market? But supporters of Chuka Umunna are absolutely defiant. They are saying that their tactics today were about putting pressure on the Labour leadership to go one step further and agree with them, and that the UK should remain in the customs union and single market.
OK, so interesting day for Labour. What about the Tories, though? It was a pretty fine margin to get your Queen's speech through.
Well, as you were saying, the magic number for Theresa May is 14. That is the majority she had in the final crucial vote on the Queen's speech that essentially established and entrenched her government. That's what she got after that deal with the DUP. I spoke to one senior Tory who said to me, that's hardly a respectable majority, but it is a workable one the government can carry on. But the government's rapid move and announcement today that it would fund abortions in England for women from Northern Ireland illustrates a crucial arithmetical point about this Parliament. If you can muster all the opposition parties and then persuade 7 Tory MPs to join you, then Theresa May has to act. And supporters of a so-called soft Brexit, they had a setback today, but they hope that that point will eventually work in their favour.
Nick, thank you.